So now I'd like to talk about a project that I started working on probably in like casual video 5 or 6. I kind of touched on it a little bit. I didn't actually give the full context of it, and I gave up because things weren't working very well. So I'd kind of like to talk about what I know about it now since I've made quite a lot of progress since then. And I still haven't quite finished it yet, like a year and a half later, but I have a solution for when I work on it later. If I can't accomplish this, I have a solution that I guarantee will work. So I'd like to kind of go over the whole background of it as well as what we kind of did in the past video and then some of the final conclusions of that. So what is the project? Well, I basically wanted to create a hotspot, like basically a loopback hotspot that doesn't have internet access. Mainly because I sometimes like to use Plex and other things, and I want to segregate it from my main network, mainly for bandwidth purposes. But, and then also the modem and router are out there, and I get much better performance with 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, and I don't get very good range in here for 5 gigahertz, so I like to create my own hotspot for that reason too. I get my own high speeds for Plex and other things, and then yeah, I get nice reliability overall. So my main computer right here does not have the ability to create a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi hotspot. Actually, I think it probably does, technically, but I have not been able to reproduce that ability since it did one time. So yeah, I used to use software called Beidou Wi-Fi Hotspot, and that allowed me to create a hotspot back in Windows 7 before they added the capability in later versions of Windows. So yeah, so I created 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi hotspot. That's worked fine for years, but now I'm all of a sudden having some really slow performance issues. I'm going over context, by the way, just to paint the picture. Then we'll go over what this recent project is involving that. So back in the day, I used to use this device right here, which basically streams audio to my hearing aids. That's my headphones, more or less, because headphones are not a good experience with hearing aids, so why not use the hearing aids themselves if they have the capability? So this allows me to use 3.5 millimeter jack to connect to my hearing aids through the computer. And I also did that with my iPad and stuff too. But the problem is when I'm using 2.4 gigahertz, my huge slowdowns that I was experiencing was in fact because of this device right here. I literally did a file transfer and it was the slowest thing you could possibly imagine. But then I moved this away from the computer and all of a sudden the speeds went way up. And then I even turned this off and suddenly the speed went up too. Then when I move it back or turn it back on, it slows down again. This does in fact slow down the wireless performance on 2.4 gigahertz, which makes sense because this probably uses the same frequency. I'm guessing it uses Bluetooth with the hearing aids, but it might use a similar technology around the same frequency. But I also discovered that if I use 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, none of those problems happen anywhere. It also doesn't cause interference with the connection from here to here. So I'm just realizing I did a bit of wordplay. This is for me to hear audio here to here. That's a different kind of here. Anyway, if you're proficient in English, you'll definitely understand what I just said. Anyways, so when I do a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, all the problems go away. The problem is my main computer cannot create a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi hotspot. Even though I can connect to a 5 gigahertz Wi-Fi, they can't actually create one. So I've also mentioned in past videos the way I create a hotspot nowadays, a loopback hotspot, is I just run a script right on the desktop. So you can see I have this hotspot script right here. And rather than creating a hotspot that's connected to the internet, this will create what's called a loopback hotspot, which is separated from the internet, but it still provides a connection. As long as I have multiple devices on this same connection, they're all going to be connected together, and Plex and other things will work with that. So I basically create a loopback hotspot in device manager. So I believe I go to add legacy hardware or something, and then through this I can basically add from this list Microsoft loopback hotspot under network adapters. So it's under Microsoft, and then you can select test loopback adapter, and then when you have that adapter you could run this script right here, which if you want it, just let me know and I'll maybe paste this in a comment so you can paste this elsewhere. It'll use that loopback interface and then create the hotspot. It also works with 5 GHz, which is great. So this is a feature that got added in newer versions since Windows 7. And it uses the mobile hotspot feature that's built into Windows. But yeah, if you want to do that and have it be segregated from the rest of the network, loopback hotspots are the way to go. But the problem is my main computer doesn't have a 5 GHz option. I looked everywhere online. There's no way to make it work. I did get Beidou Wi-Fi hotspot to create a 5 GHz hotspot one time, but I must have bumped some weird keyboard shortcut to make that happen, because I've tried to reproduce that and I cannot do it no matter what. If you know how, let me know in the comments, but it's not really useful to me anyway, because I have a better solution now. So for a while, I just started using the Intel NUC right here, which does work with 5 GHz. That creates a nice Wi-Fi hotspot for my devices, doesn't suffer wireless interference, provides the segregation that I like, and it works amazing. But the problem is, of course, my main computer doesn't support that. And a lot of times I'm doing home lab type stuff, and my Intel NUC definitely works nicely as a home lab machine. So sometimes I might want to use that hotspot when I'm in a whole different operating system that isn't even set up to create hotspots or anything. So at that point, I just have my main computer, which doesn't work with 5 GHz. I'm not going to deal with the shenanigans of 2.4. So then what? Well, I have a server that I've been wanting to put together for a while now, and I decided if I get the server set up the way I want in a virtualized environment with XCP-ng, one of the things that I want to do is that 5 GHz hotspot. So if my Intel NUC is unavailable and I need that, well, maybe my server would work. So of course I could just use a router, which I think we do have a spare one if I'm not mistaken. But if I had a server, that's not the only use case I would use it for. If I created a virtualized environment, I could create like 5 or 10 different VMs that serve different purposes for home labs and stuff like that. So it kind of makes sense for me to do the server, because I could get a really nice wireless card, get faster speeds than I've ever gotten on any other device. Basically, the device I'm using, whether it's my MacBook or my iPad or whatever, that would be the limitation of the speed rather than the network card in the computer. So I could get a good network card for the server if I were to do one of those. I've also wanted to have extra Ethernet, potentially a segregated network on there using pfSense or something. So I could get a gigabit card as well with several ports. and it just provides so much opportunity, right? Well, so until I got around to actually building the server and everything, I decided I would do some testing on the Intel NUC. I did a little bit of testing in a past casual video, but I still hadn't got that working, right? So I did a whole bunch of testing on video. I gave up. I tried to get it working in pfSense, which involved passing through a graphics card. Network card. I got the network card passed through, which shows up in pfSense, but it doesn't have the capability to create an ad hoc wireless hotspot. So I was thinking maybe I'd be able to do that in pfSense. So then I decided to try doing that in Windows, because Windows has a nice capability. And as you know, I got that hotspot script right here that I could use in my VM. That never worked either. Then I decided to do a Debian one, which I would use host APD, because I actually used to create a loopback hotspot on the Raspberry Pi. I was basically trying to create a portable Plex server in a different video. I'd be able to take it anywhere I want, and it would provide its own Wi-Fi for me to connect to it completely headlessly. I think it was 5 gigahertz, or at least that would be a goal. And then I can watch videos on there no matter where I am. It just provides its own Wi-Fi with a loopback hotspot, then I can connect to it and watch Plex wherever I am without internet. And that was primarily useful because back then my iPad still doesn't have a micro SD card port. It's not going to magically manifest itself a decade later at this point. Even with an adapter, it still won't be read in iFile or anything like that. So using the Raspberry Pi, I can take a micro SD card, create a Plex server out of it, and that works pretty well. So the Raspberry Pi would be an option for a loopback hotspot too, but not really the most convenient with my setup. So yeah, I tried Debian on that video. I used host APD on the Raspberry Pi. So what if I took Debian and used host APD on there as well? Well, I found that it didn't really work. I pretty much gave up on that video about 2.5 or 3 hours later. And I decided to take a whole different approach. Well, I decided to use the Intel NUC till I have the server. If I can get it working on there, then I will likely be able to get it working on the server as well. So I'm trying to get it working on the Intel NUC so that I can eventually do an update on it too. And then hopefully by the time I have the server, I'll have a solution ready to go. Well, it turned out to be a big mess, and I completely understand why I failed in the video. Well, maybe not completely, because it is quite technical, but because of that, I understand that it is technical, and so what did I expect, given how complicated it is? So I ended up contacting a forum, and I'll just kind of walk through what I've been trying to do and kind of how that's worked. Looks like my computer must have fallen asleep. Oh yeah, look at that. That's really odd. I never put it to sleep, and it should never happen all by itself. Well, I just woke it up. So I kept trying all sorts of solutions, like creating the Debian hotspot in XCPNG. I would do a pass-through like I did in the video. Then I'd try all sorts of different stuff. At the time, I assumed that I wasn't working on Debian because I was performing the steps wrong. But then as I investigate a bit further, it still doesn't work even with that. So I was using AI to help me with that, but I still didn't have very much luck. So I decided to reach out to a forum because I've had enough of this and somebody should be able to help me, right? So this is my post. If you've ever stumbled across this, that is me. So I'm basically describing how I can't get my wireless card, and I show basically running like IPA or IOP config in Linux, and then they suggest installing that firmware. This is actually what's in charge of most wireless card support in Linux. So without this, you're probably not going to be able to connect wirelessly. This is a pretty critical component right here. So definitely get that. And then I try reinstalling with the latest version. Some other weird thing I was experiencing is I went from Debian 11 to 12. I did a Debian 11 net install. Because Debian 12 is the latest, it automatically updated that to 12, which is quite bizarre. And then they also assumed that maybe the card was disabled in the BIOS or something like that, which never worked very well. So I tried re-enabling it, doing all sorts of stuff, and basically not making any progress. And then they assume that it's related to the hardware or a BIOS related issue. They assume it's either hardware or firmware rather than software. And then this is quite an arrogant assumption that I made. When looking at it now, this was completely wrong, because I did a little bit of further testing and I'm now realizing I'm contradicting myself. So yeah, I say that when I run it on Windows it works fine, and then same with Debian, but now on Debian 12 I assume that's what's causing the problem. But looking at it now, it actually doesn't make a difference whether I'm using Debian 11 or 12. So yeah, I passed the device through, discovered that it doesn't work on Windows, and the fact that it doesn't there suggests that there's something more than just Debian. Because with Windows, I just add the Loopback hotspot, run the script, away I go. Well, maybe I have to install a driver first. Once I get the wireless card itself working, then I can do those steps and it should work. Well, when I did that, it doesn't work in a VM with XCP-ng, but it works on the host operating system. So then they're wondering about the whole Debian 11 versus 12. And then now I'm kind of thinking, yeah, I did a dual boot, worked fine on there. And at this point, I'm assuming it's Debian 12's fault that the IWL Wi-Fi is firmware stuff for the card isn't working. And then I have to correct my Debian sources. So now the IWL Wi-Fi package was actually put into a slightly different repository. It used to be part of, I think, the main branch. Maybe the non-free branch, I can't quite remember. But now you have to add non-free firmware, which is separate from non-free. So at the end of each line, you now have to add non-free firmware to the sources in the etc apt sources list. And yeah, then IWL Wi-Fi is inside of there. So then I run this and it basically doesn't work. Then now they're assuming it's a wireless card at this point. And then I replicated the setup on the regular machine rather than a VM. And I discovered that the wireless device has no problem showing up on the host operating system. So at this point, now I'm thinking, even though my device does show up through PCI pass-through, it must not be 100% one-on-one once you pass it through. And so based on the testing, it works on the host operating system, but not XCP-ng. Even if I do a proper pass-through, and I list the devices with LSHW-C network, the device shows up, but I cannot get it to fully register, and then it kind of craps out when I start Windows. It'll do like a firmware panic or something like that. It just doesn't work. Then of course somebody suggests that I use MX Linux, which is a distro based on Debian. And I assume, like, since it is based on Debian, why would this be any different? I decided to try it anyway, but I have my doubts. It's basically just Debian slightly reconfigured. And yeah, the problem still happens even on a live session of MX Linux. And then this is basically where it leaves off. Nobody's gotten back to me since mid-July, so this happened several months ago. So as you can see, I didn't really make much progress with that. But I did discover that if I do it on bare metal, I don't have any of the problems. So at this point, I think it's XCP&G's fault. Because yeah, XCP&G is pretty much all that gets added into the picture. Even though the PCI pass-through seems to be working fine, it doesn't properly register as a wireless device, so I can use host APD. I was thinking it was my hotspot configuration at first, but when I look at the basic steps in the troubleshooting pathway, you can see that toward the beginning, the network card should be working before you can create a hotspot. That wasn't even working, so that's where I need to put my troubleshooting energy. So yeah, I discovered that doesn't work very well. So then I decided at this point it's time to build the server. So I'm not going to work on it until I get the server built. I'm just going to hope whatever card I put in there will work better. So as I'm getting the components, I'm trying to choose a wireless card that's likely to work. I found one that's got 2.4 gigabits wireless, which is wild. So yeah, now I finally got the components added to the server. It's actually right here, by the way. I literally have it right here. So this is the actual server. Let's try to show you the whole thing. As you can see on the back, I have a wireless card in there. And then there's a graphics card because there's no integrated graphics. And so I decided to try stuff on here. And it basically doesn't work. Kind of weird that you can carry it like this, but I don't actually have it mounted on a rack or anything. So long story short, I tried getting it to work on the server, and the server suffers the same problem. So the weird thing about that card is on Windows you have to download a driver. I have a TP-Link Arch or something or other. It's a 2.4 gigabit card, or goes up to 867 megabit on 5 gigahertz, I think. I think it works with 6 gigahertz if I'm not mistaken. That's where the 2.4 comes from. It works on raw Windows, which is great, but it doesn't work on XCP&G. Works on raw Debian as well. It does surprisingly show up. I thought that I would need a special driver, but raw Debian does actually have support for the card. I actually have a configuration on the server right now. I may as well show you what happens because I have it ready to go. I mean, I gotta plug it in since I literally just ripped it right out of where I have it. And now I need to hook it back up. So let's go onto the server and see what's on it. Alright, we should be hooked up and ready to go. So, moment of truth. Oh, and then my thing needs to be refreshed. Alright, hopefully that'll work now. So if I turn on the server, do we get anything? So I'm all hooked up. So yeah, I did build the server from scratch not too long ago. I'll show some pictures and stuff in a bit. Actually, I recorded it, so I have some footage as well. Okay, so apparently that was actually my capture card glitching out, but the BIOS works, so that's great. Quit without saving, yes. Oh, I know why. So I was doing a test basically yesterday. I was trying to run a USB drive boot from it, but I didn't want to mess with my internal drive, so I shut off the SATA port, which you can do in the BIOS apparently. You just have to go to, I think here, then you can go to SATA configuration, and then you can shut each port on or off. You might remember one of my casual videos, the previous ones, I think I tried this on my main system and that's not possible. But this server, you can turn individual ports on and off, which is pretty cool. So here I'll enable that. Then we'll save and exit. And then it should successfully boot now. So this is a machinist. And while it's booting, I'll show you some video clips because I actually recorded the process of building this. I wish I did that with my first computer. That's one of my biggest regrets, so I didn't fail to do that this time. I'll show a little bit of footage. We're gonna have to refresh that again, I think, because that's the capture card's fault. Sorry we didn't get to see the BIOS splash screen, but it's basically it's a machinist brand. So yeah, I have XCP&G on here. It boots Linux Mint, as you can imagine. Yeah. Oh, I have to be in my main source. Okay, so now we'll be able to see. There's the server in Linux Mint. As you can see, it works, and it's about as fast as you'd expect it to be. So yeah, that was pretty exciting when I got it working. So yeah, I guess here's some, while we're waiting for it, here's some footage of me putting the motherboard in. That was a bit of a struggle because I forgot how standoffs work and stuff like that. But yeah, so I'm just kind of lining up the motherboard standoffs, and I put in the, I think this is actually at the point when I'm trying to figure out where the standoffs go based on the motherboard design. So once I get that all figured out, then I can put the standoffs in and then finally screw in the motherboard. And then doing the fan was quite difficult as well. I ended up taking out the middle part of the rack, and yeah, I swapped out the fans mainly so it was quieter. I went to Noctua fans. I haven't actually noticed that much of a difference in the decibel levels, but even the stock fans, at least for me, aren't that bad in terms of the volume and stuff like that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Also, for those of you who are into ASMR, you want to see the unboxing moment real quick? I think I should have sound set up. I apologize if I don't. But here's a little bit of, maybe I should temporarily shut off the music as well. Do I have control of that? Not at the moment. Okay, ready for some ASMR? I'm gonna peel a pack off, and it's a pretty big one too. Here we go. Oh yeah, savor the moment. There we go. So there we go. There's some ASMR for those of you who like ASMR. Hopefully that was good anyway. I'm not super familiar with ASMR myself, so I don't know if that was actually good or not. Feel free to let me know if you want. Anyway, so the servers should be working now. So we come on to it. Looks like XCP&G as you would expect. So I'm gonna switch over to my primary computer and I'll log in via XCP&G. Why did my computer go to sleep again? My computer is not supposed to fall asleep at all. I don't think it's set to do that. until like 5 hours later, but definitely hasn't been 5 hours, so that's really bizarre that it would do that. We'll take a look at the sleep settings when it logs in. Okay, sleep. It's literally set to never go to sleep. Why in the heck would it fall asleep during the video? I assure you, it doesn't happen at any other time. Weird that it would happen on video. If I look at the power settings, or I go to choose what the power buttons do. Ooh, I wonder if it's this thing. Maybe I want to turn that to do nothing. So I have a keyboard shortcut to put it to sleep. That's fine. I'll just set it to not do anything and just use my keyboard shortcut or the Steam controller whenever I want to do that. I don't usually press the physical button. It's possible that I've been bumping it without realizing it. I don't know exactly what's been happening with that. Regardless, let's close this out with my mouse magic button. Pretty nice. And we'll go into XCP&G, enter the master password. Oh, my Ethernet's not hooked up actually. That's also why it didn't show like the MAC address and stuff. Apparently my Ethernet's not hooked up right now. I'm probably gonna want to get that hooked up. Hold on. I think not only is my Ethernet not hooked up, yeah, look at my whole network is disconnected. I'm gonna have to connect that as well. It's missing a latch on the wire. The Ethernet cable is missing a latch, so it comes out pretty easily. Almost all the Ethernet cords I currently use are missing a latch. I don't know why I haven't even bothered trying to replace it yet. I have new Ethernet cables. I've just been procrastinating hooking the new ones up. I'm just a master procrastinator. Okay. It looks like it just auto-connected itself. Perfect. So this Debian VM that I have right here is where I was trying to do the hotspot. You kind of show you what happens from here. But yeah, when I run it on the raw system, it works without a special driver. Oh, I guess I must have reinstalled Windows to see if it works on there, and I determined that it doesn't work on Windows, even with the special drivers that you need. Yeah, it doesn't work on Windows, and I guess I don't have Debian ready, so never mind. But yeah, it doesn't work pretty much anywhere. If none of that works, then what? Well, given that it works on the host operating system, but not on the virtual machine, I think XCP&G is where the problem is coming in. I wouldn't be surprised if it worked on Proxmox instead, because that's based on Debian. Proxmox is really just a Debian-based distribution, whereas XCP&G is RHEL-based. And I think, yeah, since it works on the host Debian without any virtualization, I would assume Proxmox would work too as a result, because it's basically just running bare metal at that point. And if it has a PCI pass-through option as well, it might actually work better on Proxmox, but I like XCP&G, so I'm going to keep using it for my purposes. So I think my ultimate solution, if I can't get XCP&G to fix it, I want to see if I can first of all, but if that's not an option, I can put that card in my main computer, and then my main computer should suddenly have 5 GHz capabilities, which it currently doesn't, but I'd probably be able to do it on my main computer, so no matter what the state is of my other computers, my main one will be able to do exactly what I want. So that's basically the solution at this point. I either get XCP&G to fix it, try Proxmox, but I like the XCP&G setup, so I'm going to stick with that. Or I just put the card in my main computer. So that's the solution at this point. If you've seen me work on this problem in the past, I just wanted to kind of go over the whole verdict with that. That's what it is.